All right. So what we know about the virus, basically, we just really need to go way on back into, you know, what a virus is, with this particular bug, there's been coronavirus. We've had coronavirus. You don't have to write. You don't have to take notes.
Oh, I do though.
I'm gonna give you all my pictures and stuff too.
Are you?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
go ahead.
So with the coronavirus, the reason why it got its name is because it has the way it's shaped. It's basically has all these prongs that stick out of it, and it looks like a crown or a corona, and around the sun that flares. They call that the corona, and so with this virus, it has all these little projections that are sticking out of it. Now, what happens inside of our cell? In our body, in our cell, we have what's called the nucleus, and inside the nucleus has our DNA, which is wrapped up together.
Yep.
And then we have these things called ribosomes.
Yep.
And ribosomes, what they do, they're like a manufacturer. So what happens? You're good, man. That's tough stuff, dude. Biology, woo! I struggled in biology, but it's
Love it.
so when the DNA gets unraveled, and we take half of that strand, and it goes through the ribosome and the little factory. Yeah, basically it's kind of like it's like a computer tape. With the old days we had little computer cards and we could push it in and out, and it would give us that data. So when our DNA goes through it, it gets sequenced, and the ribosome pulls in amino acids and puts together as that ticker tape, or that half of DNA comes out. It's coming out with a protein, and proteins kind of wrap around and shape each other, and proteins are kind of like a string that have little sticky spots all around it, but each one of those proteins are structured to do a particular task in our body. So when sure, you go ahead.
Put that thing on there, though.
I'll run home and come back because they're on their way. They told me 1 o'clock.
Okay.
So I'll take a long break then.
Okay. All right. Okay, sorry about that.
No, that's okay. So what happens is that when we acquire one of these viruses, what happens is that one of these prongs basically attaches to the cell.
Go back to the protein.
Oh, sure.
What were you saying about the protein?
Oh, well, proteins, basically, a protein is essential. And it
has an assignment.
Everything in our body, the way it works and processes and structures and everything are put together as a result of a protein. And basically, we have half the DNA, which goes through the ribosome, and the ribosome pulls in amino acids and puts them into a sequence.
Yes.
And so once it puts it in that sequence, as the strip comes out, the one end, the half the DNA comes out, the other half of it is the proteins, as it's basically, and it kind of folds around on top of each other and creates this kind of a ball, but it's a very complex structure, and that's what a protein is. And each protein has its own specific structure for its own specific function throughout the body. And so, and then once it's done with that strand of DNA, it gets put back in the nucleus and wrapped back up and saved for later. So what happens then, viruses hijack the cell. And when it lands on the cell, it takes one of those prongs and injects it with what's called RNA. And it runs through our ribosome with its RNA. And unfortunately, when the product comes out, it comes out into the structures that develop a virus. So what happens then is that it continues to run through, producing more inside of the cell. It produces more and more of these viruses inside the cell, until finally the cell gets so overwhelmed that bonk, it busts open, and those viruses spill out, and then they hijack other cells, and over and over and over again.
Trojan horse.
Right, and so now one of the things that we don't do is we don't truly appreciate how important our immune system is.
Yes.
Our immune system, and it's appreciation and respect
Yes.
in the fact that, our immune system pretty much, any disease process is all related to our immune system.
Yes.
Anything that happens,
Yes.
even heart disease
Cancer.
cancer,
Even too.
cancer especially, we ask ourselves, how is it that a little kid can get cancer?
Yeah.
Well, for some reason or other, something's wonky with the immune system. Sometimes our immune system doesn't work good enough.
Okay.
Sometimes it works too good. Then we start struggling with inflammation, lupus, heart disease. Like I said, heart disease. Basically, in heart disease, what happens is that, we sit there and around the inside of our blood vessels is called an endothelial tissue.
Yes.
And what happens is a blister can occur, sometimes smoky. If you ever seen paint thinner poured on paint and then watch it bubble up? That's what cigarette smoke does to the endothelial tissue. It creates these blisters on the cell wall. Then what happens is that we have these macrophages. And macrophages are kind of like our Pac-Man in our body. And they go around gobbling up, whatever, it's not supposed to be there. Trash, bugs, bacteria, anything.
They're like the Roomba.
They are, exactly. But with a big belly. And what they do is they like to get inside of those blisters, and they love gobbling up cholesterol. And cholesterol builds up in it. And then what happens, they call that an arthroma. And it's basically a fat, bulgy body inside of our blood vessel wall. Now, if what happens is that bulgy body ends up rupturing, and that cholesterol spills out, the body says, "Whoa, we
too much of that in here."
No, there's a breach. There's a breach. We gotta plug the hole.
Oh,
so the body comes in and plugs that hole. Now, if it happens, somewhere in the body, we don't really notice it all much. However, if it hits a really important vessel like our heart or our brain, we have like either a heart attack or we have a stroke. Now, what happens over time is that the body will eventually reabsorb that cholesterol. But what's left behind are mineral deposits. We can have calcium, and it's literally like barnacles inside of our blood vessels. So when a cardiologist gets in there and takes a look and says, "Whoa, he can't get through," because that stuff, it's not cholesterol built up anywhere. It's rock. It's literally rock that's in there in the vessel, and it says, we can't put a stent in there. We have to do a bypass. We have to go around that blockage. So, so that is an example of when our immune system works too well. Now that kind of plays into what happens with the coronavirus too, and we'll get back to that. So what? When our immune system's not working good enough, now, then we sit there and we make ourselves susceptible to bacteria, and bacteria can get a hold, take hold in our body, and sometimes we notice that, when we take an antibiotic, for a cold, but then we end up getting a yeast infection because, when we're babies, when we're in mama's belly, that is the only time in our entire life that we are bacteria free. That's the only time we are ever sterile, because when mama's water breaks, we are baptized in bacteria.
Into the world.
And
If they on drugs?
Well, I'm just talking about bacteria. And so when mama's water breaks, we are baptized in bacteria, and within an hour we have millions of bacteria on us. By the end of the day, we have billions of bacteria, and within about 72 hours, we have trillions of bacteria all over our body. Now, it's a communal relationship. We depend on them, and they depend on us, and and it's a balance, and that's one of the things. There's actually even studies that are looking into the microflora of our gastrointestinal tract in the relationship with behavior, and if these things can be out of balance, can that affect our behavior or emotions and things like that? Who knows? But it's that important, that balance. Now, when our microflora gets out of whack, that leaves opportunistic organisms to get in there. And so,
Yeah.
and so when that happens, our body has to mount this, immune reaction. We're like, okay, we're going to get this thing. So if we get a, splinter in our finger or hand or something like that, it causes damage to the tissue. And what's released are what's called cytokines. And they're these chemotactic messenger system that goes out to the body and says, whoa, we've got a problem here. So what happens then is that it creates this inflammatory response. And so what happens with the inflammatory response is that, what you want to do is you want to mobilize the troops. So you want a lot of your army, your white blood cells and everything to come and fight whatever bacteria or anything that's in that area. But one of the things you got to do is you got to open up the roads. So we start to see inflammation, which causes the little capillaries. Now, with our capillaries, the blood comes out of the heart, comes down through the arteries, passes through teeny tiny capillaries. Now, capillaries are only one cell thick. There is no cell in our body that are farther than a few microns away from a capillary. Now, when the capillaries, once the blood passes through that, it comes back up to the heart through the veins. So, but in those capillaries, like I said, there's only one cell thick. Now, what happens when those inflammatory chemotactic markers are released into that area, it causes those capillaries to dilate and to open up. And not only do they get wider and allow more blood flow, they become porous. And they allow blood, and not necessarily blood. If blood's needed, it'll seep into there, but it'll let white blood cells, fluid, other materials get in there. And so when we see where that splinter gets stuck in there, over time, we start to see it kind of get swelled up, and then we start to see pus, that develops around it. And pus, when we see pus, that's just basically evidence that that's dead white blood cells. The gooky gunk that comes out of our nose, when we see, we're like, we blow our nose, and we're like, oh, it's green, or oh, it's yellow, and we're like trying to figure out, okay, is that a bacteria? It basically just says that there's evidence of white blood cells, because when we see the green stuff coming out of our nose, that's dead white blood cells, because it's bombarding that area with white blood cells trying to attack that bug.
Absolutely.
And so, so with that, the initial response, if we're not familiar with it, we have to mount a new attack. So we get this front line and white blood cells that go in for the attack.
Okay.
Now, once they mount that attack and they knock out the bug, they develop what's called antibodies. Right. And antibodies says, okay, you know what? We don't have to go through that whole big rigmarole. But again, we know what this guy looks like. And when we see him again, we're going to just go right to our special forces and bang, knock him out. But unfortunately, what can happen is that when that initial attack occurs, it can be a bit overwhelming. And with the virus and with other diseases, like tuberculosis. What's interesting is tuberculosis, the actual bug itself, doesn't cause harm. The bug itself does not actually do damage to the human, the host. It's our own body trying to kill the bug that attacks that area so much that it causes necrosis to the tissue, and basically you get these big cavitations, and eventually what happens is we encapsulate it in what's called a casein that keeps it trapped and away from oxygen to proliferate, to keep it from proliferating. So so that's a little bit different bug than this one, in that we can stop it, we can kind of hold it at bay, but tuberculosis is terribly contagious. With this bug, what happens is that it's very unusual, and it's very aggressive, and we call it what's called virulence. The virulence is the ability of an organism to be able to, one, set up shop in its host and reproduce and sustain itself. And so, and this one has shown to be pretty darn impressive
Very
with this room.
efficient with it,
Very
right?
efficient. Oh yeah. I mean, considering on December 31st,
Okay.
December 31st, China just noticed that their patients were infected with an unusual bug. Just a few,
Right.
they had I think a few dozen patients that were, this is strange. This
Right.
is unusual.
It's not
December 31st.
normal, yeah.
That's it. That was the first time that they were like, and they picked up the phone and they're like, oh, there's a problem here.
Right.
And since then, this thing has exploded worldwide.
Yes.
And that's what's so impressive about this bug,
Yeah.
in that, it has spread so quickly and so quietly, across the world. Now, with this bug, one of the things, now, like what I was saying with tuberculosis is a very small bug, and it only takes a few of the organisms to infect. So what happens, it's so small and so lightweight, it can actually float in the air for hours inside of like a moisture droplet, but it can be suspended in air for a long time. With tuberculosis, however, the CDC did a study, and they were like, okay, we got to come up with some criteria here to figure out investigating that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So there was a flight that came from Asia, and with the flight, they determined the number 6. You got to be, within 6 feet for 6 hours or more in order to be susceptible to acquiring, tuberculosis. In that, the tuberculosis kind of gets in the air and it floats around, and you have to be close to that person and for a long period of time in order to breathe it in. And the air can't be, even this fan right here could disrupt it enough to where it would reduce our chances from acquiring, the tuberculosis. This bug is a little bit different because with viruses, they're a little bit heavier. And when we cough them out and stuff like that, they're in droplets. They call it droplet precautions because it comes out and it can stay in the air for just a short bit, but it goes straight to the ground and hits the floor. This one's a little bit lighter weight and it stays in the air a little bit longer. Okay. Now the problem with that too is that with the viruses, we can also be the vector for the virus. So we can pick it up off the surface and we can wipe our nose or lick our fingers or wipe our eyes or, just simply breathe it in. And so with this, with this virus too, and I saw where I read somewhere that it attaches to the angiotensin sites, which is, through a process of the blood pressure, we go through the renin-angiotensinogen cycle. So, it goes to this and gets converted to that, and then, we're ACE inhibitor, basically, angiotensinogen converting enzyme, inhibitor, that the medication inhibits the angiotensinogen enzyme to lower blood pressure. Well, those receptor sites are in the lungs, and that's why I suspect that an ACE inhibitor causes people to have a dry cough. So this bug likes those angiotensinogen receptor sites and gets onto those sites, and one of the common symptoms is a dry cough. Now, once it gets in there, and it takes hold, it goes, hijacks the cell, starts reproducing itself, and starts to shed the virus. Now, the virus is beginning to shed, and, it's kind of leaching out and just kind of landing in the lungs or just kind of floating around in our lungs. And then we're just standing here and I'm talking to you and I'm spraying you with this virus. even though I just had my temperature taken and I'm good. But, but I'm sitting here just bathing you up and down with the virus. And so,
It's just like one of the little videos I showed my family over the weekend. I love it. Go ahead.
Yeah, and that's
because they had the guy with the spray.
Yeah,
he just talking.
And that's
because you can't see it.
Right. Now, yes, at that point, when I'm doing that, they call it the viral load. How much I'm like spewing out. It ain't that much. Now when I'm coming in, I don't feel so good. So, and I'm, and I'm coughing. Oh, let me tell you, it's like a fire hose now.
Right.
I'm like, whoosh.
It's hot.
Yeah, I mean, you are getting the immersion.
Yes.
Hallelujah.
Yes.
And so, and that's essentially what happens is that, even though folks are not showing any symptoms, they can still spread the virus. And when they're sitting there and we're like, I'm like, clear my throat and whatever, and I just, covered your surface, and you come in and you're like, oh yeah, I want to just drink my, and so you inoculate yourself, and there goes again that cycle, boom, 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 and that's what's been so impressive with this bug. I mean, when from a pathological, enthusiast standpoint, this guy's really, he rocks. I mean,
it's really
he's bad to the bone, and so once that occurs, now the other point too is that what's scary about it is how quickly it kills people. I mean, like, they get it and they're like, what, this guy dead? All of a sudden?
Yeah, because on the news even there's like, I don't know if they've identified a true trend yet of because one family was talking about the brother was top of his health fitness guy and got it, and within a short period of time he was dead.
Right.
Like, so it wasn't a immunocompromised person per se.
Right. And there again, now when we're talking about the immune system and how much we should really truly respect it. Now one of my greatest heroes of all time is a young black woman. Her name is Henrietta Lacks. Henrietta Lacks. What a hero! Yes. I mean, she is like an angel, yes. And she is such an unsung hero. And so, but as a result of her, she had cervical cancer. She had a sample, and from that sample, we've been able to reproduce the immortal HeLa cells and have studied it. It's the HeLa cells in every laboratory around the world. Yes. And we, up until just recently, we didn't know what HeLa meant. Henrietta Lacks, and they just and so great story, good book. Gotta read it. Yeah, it's wonderful story.
Well, on that note, because Dr. Clark was on the conference call with us Monday, and he was mentioning because they've got the little antibiotic regimen with the Z-Pack and the I always butcher the name, chloroquine or whatever, and but then he was saying they're also adding, which I always would promote anyway, is the zinc supplement to that. Now, talk about that, Patho, because he was saying that there's, I guess from whatever study he read, that it's supposed to inhibit it from entering the cell. What is your knowledge on that?
I've got to do my homework.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay.
And I'm not certain about that. And, and this is...
I can't wait.
And that's what's so impressive, too, is that all this evidence is just coming out. I mean, it's like...
Yeah. Because we know zinc is great for the immune system.
Right. And so, and there's components to, what makes things, work, and I'm not certain about that. And so
I'm going to do some research too, because it sounds like...
Because when I was doing my research on zinc, the only concern that I was seeing with zinc is...
blood pressure.
That too, but the possibility of overdose.
Okay.
On zinc.
Yeah. So,
because you can have too much zinc in your body.
So I'm gonna have to defer that till later until I've done my homework. But at this point, so getting back to what I was talking about with the immune system. Now, one of the things that is impressive with cancer, and with Henrietta Lacks and her cancer, the cancer kind of is a bizarre entity that. With the immune cells, now in our DNA, we have what's called telomeres, and telomeres are little ticker points on our DNA that, over time, those little pieces break off. Those telomeres break off. And eventually, as they start to break off, we start to notice things like gray hair and wrinkles and things like that.
Because those original cells are now different.
Right. And so as we get older, our DNA degrades. However, with the HeLa cells, they did not degrade. They stayed exactly the same. However, there's been contaminations and mutations and things like that that have occurred over time. But if there was, the same exact cells they extracted from her, from day one, would be exactly the same cells today. If the only thing it was able to get was the food and the temperature and all that stuff it needed, without contamination, without mutation, it would be the same exact cells.
Yeah.
Right. And so what happens in our body? And there's our immune system. And one of our things with our immune system is that every day there's probably about 10 cells in our body that have the potential for becoming a catastrophic cancer. However, with our competent immune system, it knocks out those cells before they have a chance to become something dangerous. But for some reason or other, sometimes there's a cell that evades our immune system, and that's the reason why we can sit there and say, "Dadgummit, why did this little kid get cancer?" I mean, for some reason or other, the immune system just didn't recognize it. And so, what do we do when someone comes in that got cancer? We first will try to extract that tumor if we can.
Right.
We'll get it out of the body. And so first we remove as much of the cells as we can. Then we try to do some other radiation therapy or chemotherapy, trying to attack the cells.
Yes.
In the hope that we can activate our immune system to attack that cell or those cells. And that's the hope. When people go into remission or they're cured of cancer, it's because suddenly their immune system, gotcha, and it knocks it out. So that is when we see our immune system as a superhero. However, there can always be too much of a good thing. And what happens with folks, it's not the initial injury that gets them, it's secondary injury. So when we think about inflammation, now inflammation, when somebody comes in and they have a stroke, they have a blood clot in their brain, and we dash them into our ER and we say, okay, we've got this great substance that's called, they call it Caflo, or it's a thrombolytic, and it dissolves blood clots. It doesn't discriminate. It dissolves all blood clots. And so we give it to them, and that's a protocol. And all ERs that we go dash them in the CAT scan, make sure it's not a hemorrhagic stroke. It's a ischemic stroke. We go, okay, boom, we get them the Caflo as quick as possible. Try to knock out that thing. Now, it's in an effort to reestablish the blood flow, because when the clot comes through, boom, it knocks out the blood flow. And so we want to reestablish that blood flow to that area. And once we achieve that, we're like, super duper, man, we've got this patient, but we're not out of the woods yet. Because now we have to watch and wait for secondary injury. Now, secondary injury occurs when those dead blood, the cells that did die, the cells that were injured, release those chemotactic responses, those inflammatory markers. And so suddenly we see this whole collage of dilated blood vessels, bombardment by white blood cells and other inflammatory response. And what happens then, we see the swelling, and that's usually what gets people. Spinal cord injuries, it's not the actual fracture that causes people to become paralyzed.
It's the response.
It's the that secondary injury. So in the football games and things like that, when you see a football player injured, like a spinal cord injury, boom, they start bombarding that guy with steroids. They have a immersion tank where it puts people into a hypothermic state. You know, when somebody, you know, there's certain protocols in the hospitals to what they have this this system where somebody has a heart attack, a big heart attack. We will, you know, take them into the hospital, and we will put them in a hypothermic state to reduce that secondary injury. Because, you know, when somebody has a big heart attack and that sort of thing, there again, it's not always just that, you know, blood
the
clot.
heart's affecting everything.
Right, and so when you're like blood flow to the brain and all the body, you know, so what we want to try to do is curtail that secondary injury, that inflammatory state. Same thing happens with this bug too, is that, you know, you get the initial injury and, you know, it's proliferating and causing damage to cells, but it's our immune system trying to attack it. And then you probably will see it, you know, in articles and things like that called cytokine storm. And cytokine storm is this just bombardment of, you know, your white immune system. Except this one pulmonologist said, you know, he's like he got it, and he was like he started, you know, coughing up sputum that was black, and he said it was color of obsidian. And you know,
is it necrotic?
It's necrotic tissue, yeah. And so, you know, so so one of the things that you know, with, you know, like when we do a CAT scan or an X-ray, when we look at an X-ray for somebody, you know, we see a bacterial pneumonia. Usually, we see it in one spot, you know, and so when we look at the lungs, you know, we got the right lung, and then we got the left lung. And in the right lung, we have 3 lobes. In the left lung, we have 2 lobes. And why is that? Because that third lobe on the left side made room for our heart. And so, you know, and so with a bacterial pneumonia, or even a viral pneumonia, but typically we see it in like one of these lobes, or we see one lobe that, you know, is, you know, basically producing pus and stuff to try to bombard that bug. Now, when we do a CAT scan on the coronavirus, what we see are what they call ground glass. It looks like ground glass in the image because of the fact that when the cell ruptures, those viruses spill out, and they kind of start taking over different spots. And ultimately what happens is that our immune system goes in and tries to knock out each one of those spots. So what we see eventually, just this whole, I've heard it's been referred to like, you know, a bomb going off in the lungs.
Yeah.
I think it's more like napalm, where just fire goes everywhere. And so, but that's one of the things we look for, you know, when we're doing a CAT scan, and and basically a CAT scan is kind of like a loaf of bread. You know, it's like we got a loaf of bread, and it's got a slice. So we can take a slice of that bread and look at it sideways and see what that looks like. And you know, with like a pneumonia, typically we see just just kind of a large area, diffused, you know, fluid, you know, where the fluid's obstructing the radiation to pass through. But with the coronavirus, we see these little dots at first. As it evolves, when the patient becomes really sick, we see larger cavitations and a lot more fluid, pleural fusions and things like that. So,
and
typically,
it happens pretty fast, right? With that.
Yes, within a few days, you have these responses. So, and it's going to be, you know, in a short time, we're going to have a vaccine. I mean, we are going to have a vaccine for this.
How short?
I would be surprised if we're not fully vaccinated around the world, probably by maybe September, October. You know, I mean, with the amount of attention and the amount of effort that's behind this, and with funding and that sort of thing, you know, we should be able to have a competent vaccination program. However, what's going to be, difficult are the folks who are like, we don't know what the government's putting in them vaccines, and they're going to put in a mind control substance. I don't know.
Yeah.
So,
Like the ones that are out here
Yeah.
refusing the quarantine and
yeah. So and that's the thing, and that's going to be a challenge all itself. But I mean, I would be very surprised if within a few months we do not have a comprehensive vaccination program in place.
Well, that's good to hear. Let me ask you a quick question though, and correct me.
I don't
if
give very good quick answers.
I know I got to jump on a conference call at 10:30, but I was thinking as you were talking about, cause and correct me if I'm wrong, because I need to go back and research the patho myself, but histamine. Isn't that supposed to kind of block a inflammatory response in the immune system to some degree, or how does that?
An antihistamine.
Right, the antihistamine.
Histamines are a component of that inflammation and stuff like that.
Right.
So even
Antihistamine.
Right. Yeah. And so essentially, there again, it's our immune system. Allergies, eczema, asthma. All of those are a hyperactive immune system. And
Correct.
so when we get these pollen in the air and that sort of thing, those proteins, proteins from the trees and the pollen get in our sinuses, and our body says, I don't like those guys.
Right.
And it says, you know what? I'm gonna just flood that area with immune response. And it's, so then we start to see that cascade event occurring. That we see the dilation of those capillaries. They become porous. Fluid seeps out. We get runny nose, runny eyes. Our eyes get all itchy. And sometimes if we rub against something, and we there again we see a contact dermatitis where the skin, those capillaries are engorged, and the tissue becomes red because there's so much blood flowing through that area. And
so what is the function of the antihistamine? Is it
well, basically what it does is, it's kind of like a steroid. It basically turns down that immune response. Now, one of the things that we do in allergy clinics and things, we take your blood. We say, okay, we're going to take your blood, and we're going to run it through a machine and see what you're allergic to, what are you most likely to have a response to. And so we get this whole chart, and we say, okay, well, she's allergic to oak trees and grass and dog fur and roach poop. Roach poop is one of the leading allergens and we live in Florida. I mean, we're in the swamp, and there's roaches everywhere. I don't care how many pesticide companies you got coming to your house.
Right.
You're gonna have a roach. I mean, you may only see it dead, but we got roaches. But what they do is they take those proteins. They see that on the list. Okay, she's allergic to this, and they take those proteins and they chop them up. And they put them into a serum, and they inject, a very small portion of those proteins into your body. So your body will
it's like a mini vaccination.
It is. And so what happens is it tones down that response. It says, okay, it basically desensitizes you. One of the studies that showed why is it that Europe has lower peanut allergies? Well, some speculate it's because the baby nipples are produced with a peanut oil derivative.
To kind of
now the recommendation is not exclusion; it's small samplings, small exposures, so that you do have many little immune responses, but because what gets you the big anaphylaxis is when you get that exposure and your body overwhelmingly hits you, and you go through the inflammation, you swell up, you can't breathe.
Yes, because I've had anaphylaxis.
You got to get on the call.
Yeah, but I'm listening to you.
And all God's people said.
Well, before you leave.
Oh, sure.
Is it true that they have chips in people over there in China?
Who you what?
Chips.
Chips.
The chips. Microchips.
Oh, I don't know.
Have you heard anything about that?
I think we all already have our own microchips. I think
Stop it.
Right in our phone.
Well. Well.
Hey. Big brother's watching you. Big brother's watching.
That's the microchip they were talking about.
They gotcha. Whoever they are, they gotcha.
Those people.
Those people.
That
Oh,
is
you mean
hilarious.
that micro? No, they were saying the implanted microchip.
Yeah, I don't know.
And the
It's coming. It's coming. The number of the
Think
beast.
so?
Now,
Shout.
on that note, and
Shout
then
to
I'm
the
gonna
devil.
finish. When you said the 6 feet and the 6 hours.
6 hours. That's for
There's a-
tuberculosis.
Okay, right. But is there some kind of 6 with this?
No. That's
6
what.
feet?
That's what I'm saying. No,
I was wondering what
listen,
other 6 was.
6 feet is the distance. You know. Well, the thing about it is there's no time. You know, is that you have to be within 6 feet and 6 hours of somebody to be really in suspect for tuberculosis. With this, if you're within 6 feet, you only need
Come in.
6 seconds and you could be exposed. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah, and that's
So
what's
6 seconds.
Yeah.
Hello, good morning.
Director of Nursing and Nursing Supervisor.
Pleasure to meet you, my love. Thank you. Welcome.
Right.
And this is our nurse practitioner, Mike. He works with our medical director, Dr. Clark.
Resident scoundrel and just common transient. I don't know.
Stop it.
All right. Thank you guys. So,
Thank you.
have a good department.